The Maasai warrior has a greeting, Kasirian and Gira. And it means, and how are the children? And if the children are fine, there's no war, there's water, there's food, the animals are healthy. If they're not fine, it's just the opposite. Our children are not fine.
No.
How is it possible that we've had this COVID disruption? We know what's happening out there, but yet we didn't move to fix it. Why is that?
I think that we have, we've indulged a particular form of denial, and we have for a very long time, I think, about the difficulties that people confront, about the blind spots in our society, and about what this really implies for literally the most vulnerable people in our country, in the world. And the pandemic made it impossible to ignore that. We have the data now. We look at these things. We saw in the course of the beginning of the pandemic, the video of George Floyd that indicated the exact nature of the world that we're living in, that these things can happen, and that it is incumbent upon all of us to do something. None of us individually can fix all of these things, but we can do something. And I think that is, when we were talking earlier, and you said, how do I remain optimistic? And I was like, that's not difficult for me. Yeah, optimism is not difficult for me because in addition to being a journalist, I'm also a historian. Long story, I was an undergrad. I just couldn't decide which career field I wanted to go into, so I just went into both. And I've been doing them my whole adult life. But the historian in me always looks at the level of difficulty that people before us confronted. And we always have it comparatively easy. And so I would think that we have a kind of momentum and moving ourselves, even as we encounter obstacles, nothing is promised, we will always have difficulties, but we still have a general momentum toward doing the right thing.
It's all relative.
It's all relative.
Basically. Thank you. I want to step into the concept of the potential change in the law for Roe v. Wade. And I want to talk about what it will do to families in terms of economically oppressing families. And so not I don't want to talk about what the construct that is collapsing around us. I just want to talk about the impact it will have on children and families.
I think we're going to potentially be stretched even more than we are right now, and that there are households that are going to have even more difficulty making ends meet. I think we have to be real about that. I also think that we have to more broadly point out what an actual society that cares about children would look like. So for me, we saw how many children were dependent upon school in order to have healthy meals. If you shut down the schools in order to prevent the pandemic from spreading, you also cut people off from their source of healthy meals. And that's a reality. That should not be the case. We should not have the kind of food insecurity that we have in this country. For me as a historian, I'm very concerned that we have a big push to gerrymander the kinds of knowledge that students can be exposed to about the history of our country, but we don't really look into whether or not those children have some place to sleep at night. We have 1.5 million homeless children in our school system in this country. 100,000 of them in the city I live in alone, in New York. That we have food insecurity, that we are still the only nation in the world that sentences children to life sentences, in our criminal justice system. that we have so many tiers of real cruelty, actually, we have to do the work of pointing out what an actual democratic, caring, concerned society would do for its children.
You know, we live in a bubble, California. You live in a bubble, New York. It's everything else, and it's everyone else that needs to hear this, right?
I'm not so sure, though. I mean, I live in New York, and sometimes I look around and I'm like, because the fact of it is that we don't have, I don't want to like talk out of turn because I'm not a native of the Bay Area, but I'll talk about where I'm from, which is New York. We have terrible cruelties to our children, despite our professions of knowing better. And being, more forward-thinking and more progressive and so on. And we have all sorts of contradictions that we don't necessarily have the will to address. And I think that is the case in a lot of places that consider themselves forward-looking. And so, yeah, I think the problem is probably less segmented than we think it is.
Well, I'm buoyed by your hopefulness.
Yeah.
It's vital that we have to keep our heads up, right? Especially in the face of such difficulty for our children. You've made a call to action with regard to continuing to do this work. Can you speak a little broader about what other kinds of work we can do as individuals to lift up our children?
Yeah, I mean, first off, going back to the thing that you said about optimism, I always say that I have optimism, but it's the optimism of a boxer in the late rounds. What I mean by that is that despite your difficulties, you're still on your feet.
Right.
And if you're still on your feet, you have a chance to win. And so I think that for all of our difficulties, we are still on our feet. That we are still here, we're still attempting, that we still are able to have looking at 5 years for this organization, think about the last 5 years. The last 5 years have been, like, if anyone was working on this dystopian novel that they wanted to write, it was just like transcription of what we've seen happen in the society. And I think that the fact that this organization is here and has gone through, these 5 years providing these services and is still growing is a testament to what I was saying about there being a momentum toward good. Now, in terms of our own commitments, there's more than we have time to talk about now, but I always think, it's your time, your talent, and your treasure, for the general. What are we devoting our time to? What are we devoting our resources to? And what abilities do we have that we can contribute that someone else might benefit from? And those are the three that I think that always are starting places.
And I'll ask you finally, what's bubbling up for you? And two, what does your utopian world look like?
I think that my utopian world is, I always say when I talk with my students about this, which is a world in which every individual has a reasonable chance of fully cultivating their talents, irrespective of their race, their gender, their sexuality, their ethnicity, their religion, any category that we've seen people mistreated on the basis of, and that we are here and able to give to the world all that we have inside of us, all the talents that we were born with, or that we've cultivated along the way, without those kind of inhibitions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jelani Cobb.